Welcome to Calc 14. Today we're going to dive into graph analysis, and this is just part one of many. Today we're going to talk about the relationships between the graphs of our just regular functions and of our derivatives. So the graphs of our derivatives are generally, we have our x-axis and our y-axis. And then we have just our sketch of the graph. So this is f. And now for f prime, our axes are going to change. So I'm still going to have my x-axis, but instead of my y-axis, I'm actually going to have y prime. And again, reminder, y prime is a derivative. It's also our idea of the slope. So instead of graphing x and y, I'm going to basically be graphing x and the slope. So what I need to do is I need to find the slope of my graph and kind of translate that into a new graph, including the slope. So looking at this graph, this is my original graph. And as you can see, it is lovely. So first what I need to do is I need to find my slopes. So I'm going to make just a really basic t-chart. So x and y prime. And I don't have really exact values here, so I'm just kind of going to guesstimate. So this slope, let me use a different color. This slope, I'm going to guesstimate this as about 4. So my x value at 0, my slope is 4. This slope looks kind of just like a basic slope. I'm going to guesstimate that at about 1. So my slope at 1 is 1. Once I get up to 2, that's where I have a flat line. So whenever I have a flat line, my slope is going to be 0. So I was climbing up, I had positive slopes, and now I'm going back down. So my slope here at 3 is going to be about -1. And then I have some gaps at 3 and 4 for my points, and so I'm going to look at 5 and 6. And again, this slope kind of looks like -1, so I'm going to say, all right, this is about -1, and then at 6, my slope is flat again. So at 6, my slope is 0. So this was just kind of a guesstimate. We were looking at the slopes, seeing if we could kind of eyeball them, and they will obviously look much better with a much nicer graph. So then I'm going to take this information and I'm going to graph it. So at 0, so again, let's write down our axes. So x and y prime, our slope. So at 0, my slope was 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's my first point I'm going to plot. At 1, my slope was 1. At 2, my slope was 0. At 3, my slope was -1. And then 4, I'm missing, and then 5, my slope was -1 as well. And then at 6, my slope was 0. And so if I kind of go back to look at my graph, my slope at 4, it's decreasing again. And so my graph is going to look something like this. So that's basically all it is. So on here, all we did was we looked at the slope at each point that we were given, and then we just graphed it onto a new graph, and we just looked at the slope. So this is our graph of f prime. And a few things we can notice about this graph is right here, this blue section, my slope is positive. So my slope is on the positive side. And if I go back looking from 1 to 2, yes, my slope was positive and it was increasing. So my slope is positive, and then at 2, my slope changes. So my slope changes from positive to negative at this point right here. Then from about 2 on, I have a negative slope. So from 2 on, I have a negative slope, and then again at 6, my slope is going to change. So every time it crosses the x-axis, that means my slope is 0, and we can usually see a change shifting. So the blue part above the x-axis, my slope was positive. Below the x-axis, my slope was negative. And it really helps to label our axes as x and y prime, and to kind of make this very basic t-chart, because then we can kind of see the points and what our slope is doing. So this is going from f to f prime. So in this scenario, I'm asked to sketch a graph with the following properties. So I'm given that f of 0 has to be 0. Then I'm given that the graph of f prime is our graph below, and I'm given that f is continuous for all x. So the first thing I really notice is f of 0 equals 0. That just means that I'm crossing at the origin. So that's a pretty easy thing to maintain. The next thing is a little bit more difficult. So I'm given this is the graph of f prime. So this is my y prime and this is my x. So if I notice from negative infinity all the way to 1, my slope is actually negative 1. We can see this. That's our tick mark. Our slope is negative 1. And then from 1 to positive infinity, our slope is positive 2. But we have this discontinuity going on at x equals 1. But if I look at condition number 3, it tells me f is continuous for all of x. So I'm going to think of different graphs that have that are continuous but aren't necessarily differentiable at a point. So if we remember, we have a cusp, we have a vertical tangent, so like the cube root, that vertical tangent, and then we also have the absolute value. And so I see that my slope is constant, so it's not changing like a cusp or a vertical tangent, so I'm going to go and I'm going to see if the absolute value 1 fits this, because I know it's continuous, but it does have that spot where it's not differentiable. So I'm going to just draw some axes, and since I'm drawing f, my axes are x and y. And so 0, 0, I got to maintain that. And then from 0 to 1, my slope is a positive 1. So I'm just going to count, it is a negative 1. So I'm going to count over and under, and I'm just going to draw a line. And if we check our axes, we can draw points along the line to make that slope 1. From 1 to positive infinity, on the other hand, my slope is positive 2. So I'm going to go up 2 over 1. Up 2 over 1. So my slope is going to be a little bit steeper. So if I go back and I double check all my criteria, did I cross at the origin? Yes, I made sure I had that point right there. Was my slope negative 1 from negative infinity to 1? Yes, it was going down. Was my slope positive infinity from 1 to 2? Yes, it was going up. And do I have that non-differentiability at x equals 1? Yes, I do. It is an absolute value. But we know that f is continuous for all of x. So this is going to be our graph of f. So this is kind of it for Calc Check. We're just going to be practicing drawing graphs of f prime, going from f prime to f, and looking at the relationship between the two. So please come to class with any questions that you have, and remember to like and subscribe.